Assalamu alaikum, brother Imam.
Wa alaikum assalam. Our brother.
My beloved, would you be so kind for clarification? You and I have discussed over the years and rather recently in reference to the cloud of confusion and contention over leadership in our community and its evolution. We know that as late as 2005, when Imam Muhammad was speaking in the Homewood sessions, what were they, the first Sunday? In the question and answer period, he was asked about the leadership in his community. And he had indicated that 95% of the leaders who identified as leaders under his leadership were not with him. And if we go back to 1975, when Minister W. Deen Mohammed became leader of the Nation of Islam, he inherited a corrupt order of leaders from the latter years of his father's leadership. Mm-hmm. And throughout his administration, there was contention with the leaders, the imams, not following the course of direction that he had designed for his community, for his people. Mm-hmm. Your leadership has picked up the second tier of leaders underneath those original hypocrites. And most of us are not quite sensitive to the extent of the outrage and opposition to the continuation and succession of Imam W. Deen Mohammed's leadership. If you would be so kind as to please, sir, take your time, because most of us, I won't say in this class, but your sensitivity has brought to my attention that you do not want to be looked at as a sour grape kind of guy who is just angry over the misrepresentation of your position and your leadership. But that needs to be clarified. Mm-hmm. We know, last point, we know that the first 10 years, from 1975 to 1985, Imam W. Deen Mohammed was unraveling the wizardry that had overtaken the Nation of Islam. I don't see any difference between his first 10 years in leadership and your 5.
Mm-hmm. Praise be to Allah. Yeah, thank you, Brother Professor. This is a big question, and it requires some historical references and some explanations. And also the introduction into the discussion some references that are personal. When historians look at a question to get better perspective so as to serve the present life and the future life, they don't discount what is called anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence, okay, is referring to personal experiences and the report on personal experiences. They don't set it aside. They just don't rank it the same as they rank something that has been noted publicly, that is known, that is well established. They don't rank it on the same level. But Islamic reasoning states that above even historical references, is truth. Truth. It is well known that there were a group of imams who had, because of circumstances, close proximity to Imam W. Deen Mohammed. If Imam W. Deen Mohammed visited a city, he would be hosted by the local imam, and that local imam may or may not have been a part of this group that was more closely associated with Imam Muhammad's leadership. And that local imam, if he was not a member of that group, he relied upon that group to give him help in terms of understanding Imam Muhammad's teaching, or to allow for him to have access to Imam W. Muhammad, or general information about the community, or in some cases, these persons would rely on this group to even get Imam Muhammad to come to their city. So they felt a kind of obligation to this group, okay? I could name the members of this group for you. This group that was around Imam Muhammad. You go to a city, you would see 3 or 4 or 5 of them with the Imam, whatever city he was in. West Coast, Midwest, South, Southeast, Northeast, wherever. You would see 2 or 3 or 4 of them with him all the time. They weren't his working for his office or representing him. They were imams of various cities. And because of circumstances, they were accepted in his inner circle of, if I can use that term. This is not a term he used, but I'm using it to be so that you all can know what I'm referring to. He referred to them as the leaders. This was his general reference. When he would speak to me, now understand, when I'm speaking of myself, it would be incorrect for me to put myself in this group, because he insisted with me that I not view myself as a member of this group. He told me that, now this is anecdotal, okay, what I'm telling you right now. This is personal. But he told me, don't associate yourself with this group. He said to me, don't put yourself under the authority of this group. And once he said to me, never do that. He said, you belong to me. Those were his exact words to me. I'm entitled to report to you what he said. I repeated this many times publicly. So he influenced me not to see myself as a part of this group. However, I was present in these settings, okay? In these settings, questions would be asked about the religion, about the Quran, about the community. An imam would speak to this group with great depth on whatever question they had. Also, in these interactions, you could see the reverence that this group had for the imam, and also the respect that the imam had for the group, generally speaking. Also, you would see imam correcting the approach, the conclusions, and the general thinking of the group. Sometimes it would be the group itself, sometimes it would be individuals. He would correct individuals. They would say something, and he would correct them. He might not say, no, you're incorrect about that. He would just give them the correct viewpoint. In some cases, he would tell them that they were incorrect. Some cases, he would tell them they were correct. So over the years of these kind of interactions, it became known who had these kinds of relationships with the imam. It was known to the group itself. It was known to others outside of the group looking at the group generally. So you had this group of imams, and then you had another group of imams that didn't have that access. They didn't have those opportunities. And there would be members in that other, in the primary group that would bar brothers from another group from having that kind of access to the imam. They would make certain that they didn't have that kind of access. Why? Because they wanted to be able to interpret to that other group what the imam was saying and what he meant by this, or whatever the case may be. There were members in that primary group that had interactions with Imam W. Mohammed in very sensitive and important moments in the history of our community. September 11th, the Imam of Washington, D.C., Imam Yusuf Salim, he was there to hear Imam W. Mohammed's comments on various things. And there were other sensitive private moments that Imam Yusuf Salim was present with Imam W. Mohammed. Things that I don't want to recount to you, but that I'm aware of, because the Imam told me, and because Imam Yusuf Salim told me, and also members in the security. They were also witnesses to certain things that increased the relevance and the importance of that particular individual for the history and proper emphasis for our community. I mentioned him by name. I won't mention others by name. I mention him by name because he's a reference for me personally. And he's an example of the failure of our leadership to be counseled by those who had a relationship with Imam W. Mohammed as to what is the correct picture for our life going forward. And much of this can't be shared by way of a khutbah or a class. It has to be shared by way of conversation, interaction, or either interview. For example, somebody sensitive to the need could interview a person like Imam Yusuf Salim and ask him specifically on certain matters. so as to counsel, to help steer the emphasis for our leadership. There was a point at which Imam W. Mohammed said to all of the leaders that I have reached the limit of my patience with you. These are his words. I have reached the limit of my patience with you. And at that point, he distinguished permanently his leadership office from their from their leadership. He didn't cancel their leadership. He separated his leadership from their leadership. And he announced that to the community. He didn't choose one of them to announce it to the community. It is my duty to announce to you, upon the request of Imam Mohammed, that he has resigned as leader of the American Society of Muslims. It would not be prudent or appropriate or wise for me to try to interpret Imam Mohammed's resignation to you of leadership of the American Society of Muslims. But I can say this to you, that no force of nature, no spirit, no influence, no person, no group can ever separate me from Imam W. Deen Mohammed. Your own soul's yearning for freedom and life and productivity. No force of nature, no spirit, no influence, no person, no personality, no group, no group of leaders could ever separate you from Imam W. He chose me to announce it to his following. His resignation was not from the interest of representing the religion on behalf of the religious community. His resignation was from an association with these leaders. You have said in your question and your comments that the Imam said that 95% of the leaders were not with him. What is important in that reference and also from his resignation from them is to say that even the ones that were closest to him he did not have confidence in them to represent or to emphasize. I don't want to say represent, because if I say represent him, then somebody will interpret that to mean, oh, you just trying to support or build the rationale to support what you're doing right now. Okay, so the better way to state this is to say that he didn't have confidence in this group to put in focus what he wanted in focus. He didn't have confidence in this group to counsel or lead in the way that he would counsel or lead. And not only that immediate group, but also that group that was relying upon that immediate group. So essentially, Imam W. Muhammad was canceling his association with the leadership and saying to them that here is what I represent, and here is what they represent. And the two things are not the same.
What we had was a wave of persons upon knowing that I was no longer accepting to be responsible for the local places or cities around the country, messages, schools, whatever, and that I was going to only be responsible for my office, the Mosque organization that I had. We had, when I say a wave, I mean we had a quick surge of persons letting me know that they were with me and they were going to stay with me. Behind that surge, we had imams who started resigning. Most of those imams have not changed a bit. They're the same people they were before. Yes, sir. They resigned only to save their face with the people that come, that have really made together, that they were with me no matter where I go. You know? And they thought that they responded to that situation by stating to us that they reside. But actually, they have changed with that. No, they have changed with that. The great majority have not changed anything.
In my opinion, my personal opinion, the ones who were closest to him making that move hurt them. And they, not that they didn't have this in their hopes or in their plans prior to him resigning from them, but at that point, they supported one another in reinforcing a plan for after he passed away.
I said several times, speaking, that I got people I know that are working to undermine me. They're right around me. They're working to discredit me. They're not working to destroy me because they know my staying around is their existence right now. Without me, they wouldn't be around either. But they're hoping when I die, they can become the leader, so they don't want you to like me too much because they're going to knock me down. They're going to be ready to knock me down and put themselves up higher after I'm dead. That's what they think. That's what they plan.
And part of that plan was to make certain that whomever emerged that was not a part of their group, but it could be argued that that person was a legitimate representative of Imam W. Muhammad, that they, as a group, would argue against that person. That was a part of their plan. It happened to be me, which for some of them, that was an expectation. Not all of them, but for the ones that would have had a confident exchange with Imam W. Muhammad and felt confident to ask him, to even just put the question before him about my status and the future of the community with regard to me in leadership, if they had the confidence to ask him a question like that, and there were some like that. In fact, I know, I'm not going to say the name of the person, but I know of one who I don't know that he asked the question, but I know that he made it known that he wanted to ask it. And he was in a position to ask it, specifically about me with regard to leadership in the community going forward. So in these critical moments right now, where several things have been abandoned by our community, one in particular, two in particular, the Ramadan sessions, they've been abandoned. The Imam, he didn't ask for us to have 50 different Ramadan meetings. A mature people with a matured leadership would say, let us assemble the same way we did when the Imam was alive, and let us put our confidence in one of us to lead us in this discussion. It's not to say that it won't be a discussion, but let us have confidence that someone can lead us in this discussion of the Quran, in this discussion of Islamic history, in this discussion of a review of sacred scripture, in the same spirit and emphasis of Imam W. Deen Mohammed. But a group that came to the conclusion that they should separate themselves in terms of a plan because they had been hurt is not going to do that. So they abandoned it. The National Convention, they abandoned. What is called a National Convention now, that is held by the son of Imam W. Muhammad and the mosque cares, and we have to be clear about that as well, is not a national convention. It's a local convention. Imam W. Deen Mohammed said clearly at the conclusion, toward the conclusion of his life, that he was wrapping up the mosque cares. In other words, he was concluding it as an office.
And I'm letting the ministry dissolve to get rid of the headache. That's right. So I'm serving God, I'm serving the religion, but I'm not having any organization except my own office. So I met with the staff today and put that forward. Little staff I have that's WDM ministry. I met with them this morning. We had a meeting, and I brought it all before them.
No sooner he passed away, they picked it back up. In that name, same name, the mosque cares, claiming that they're continuing in the way that Imam W. Muhammad conducted his affairs as an office. And, you know, I don't want to have any empty critique, but I want to see what is the continuity. What is the continuity? Where is the continuity? If you say this is the mosque cares, okay, where is the continuity of that which the mosque cares was involved in? One thing that the mosque cares, one primary interest of the mosque cares was as a representative of what is proper for dawah in the public spaces, at least in America. That has been abandoned. Also, the Mosque Cares was a charity, a public charity, giving to just causes in the United States of America and outside of the United States of America. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any public declaration of charitable support of any just causes by the current configuration of the Mosque Cares. But I could be wrong. I haven't seen it. Charity with regard to the public commitments of the mosque cares was a public responsibility, and Imam treated it as a public responsibility. So it was known what he supported, what he gave to. We could talk about it right now as if it were the same, as if he was speaking to us right now. He supported the Palestinian interest. He supported the Kashmiri interest. He supported the determination of all oppressed people in the spirit of what is a dignified representation of human purpose, no matter where it was on the earth. And Imam Muhammad didn't borrow from the language of other people to describe our interests. He expressed himself clearly in our language with references to our tradition. And the mosque cares was the office setting for that representation. We don't see it. So the National Convention was an assembly to support the spirit of our people in our natural concern to be together as a religious, ethnic people. Wasn't a local concern, it was a national concern. And the highlight of that was to hear from Imam W. Deen Mohammed, both at the Jummah prayers and at a public meeting. So why then, the leaders of this group of people, would they abandon a powerful unifying force, at least spiritually, for our people? Because they don't want to identify any particular person as leader. Because someone has to lead the Jummah and someone has to give the public address. Well, who will that be? We're not going to acknowledge a leader. So you can see how they have agreed upon something because of them being hurt by him, and also because of the reasons that he separated himself from them. He said in that separation that what he represents and what he is working for on behalf of the people is distinct from their interests.
The flames of passion leaps over the sentiments of the heart and puts us in the hellfire. This has happened to many of our so-called leaders in MAS, in the Muslim American Society. And they're working against us. They ain't working with us, they're working against us. The selfish thing in their hearts makes them rivals instead of helpers. They are rivals instead of our helpers. And they didn't just come about. They're among us and they're organized secretly. And they organized secretly long ago, even before I became your leader. They organized and set themselves over you by a show of support for my father in the first phase, and by a show of support for me in this phase. We are taking our life to where God will have it. We ain't gonna stop until we get there. We ain't gonna stop halfway with just half of our life to satisfy slave makers who want to just suck our blood till we're gone from this earth. No. So I say to you, demands that have shown me by you not coming out in the Muslim Journal, making a statement in support of what I'm doing in the way of business. I'm saying to you, you're against me and you're against us. And you were hypocrites in the time of my father.
If we look at the community presently, we see them in charge of these local mosques, and we see those that were associated with them also in charge. What we don't see is any of the areas of emphasis supported by them as a collective group identifying someone representing the group itself. So the economic concern. We see achievers in our community who are business people, who have done an outstanding job and who continue to do an outstanding job. And we can refer to them for their successes. But in terms of representation of an economic focus or agenda, we see no representation. We see individual business people and individual achievements that we can applaud and feel proud of, but we see no concerted effort on behalf of the leadership to support an economic vision for the Muslim American or Muslim African American community. We see passing weakened references to concepts such as the collective purchasing, CPC, and New Africa, passing weakened references, but no concerted attention. Why? Because they refuse to identify a leader. So their interest, now, here's another component to put in here. If the group that was not having direct access to Imam W. Mohammed is seeking counsel from the group that did have direct access, and they were honestly asking questions of that group and saying to them this kind of thing: brother, don't tell me how you feel about it. Tell me what Imam Muhammad said on this matter. I'm not asking for your interpretation of it. Tell me what he said. And if I can find out what he said, tell me also how he explained it when he sat with you privately, when you asked him about it. He said something, and then you asked him, Brother Imam, what does that mean? Tell me that conversation. Not your opinion, not your sentiment, not if somebody got in trouble at the table or you got in trouble. Tell me what he said in explanation so that I may counsel myself and also at the same time share with the congregation what is the proper view of this point. That has not taken place. Because if you're having an honest conversation like that, then you can't dismiss the person who you know represented him. You can't have a conversation like that and say, okay, well, I can't, brother, honestly, I can't answer that question for you. But there is a person who can answer it, but we don't want to acknowledge him. Why? Because Imam W. Mohammed hurt us, and we're not going to acknowledge the one that we know represented his office and represented his interests to us and to the community as retaliation. what I'm describing to you, I'm describing in great detail what Imam W. Mohammed had already explained would happen. That they would use a reference to him to the extent that it served their interests. And when it didn't serve their interests, they would discard it. Now, the question becomes, are we properly represented in the world by this group? I looked recently at a itinerary, a schedule of events for a meeting that a group of imams in our association had. They made it public. I wasn't searching for it. Somebody sent it to me. And I looked at the schedule, and they had the, it was a gathering of imams in a certain state, and they had the typical things that you would expect: recitation of the Quran, maybe some tafsir on the Quran, a reference to Imam W. Muhammad's leadership, and then they had a reference to the election, the presidential election. And they may have had some reference to a cultural exchange or event, and maybe some discussion on economics or finance, business development. The things that you would typically associate with a meeting of our leaders. So that part of the agenda, you know, you could take that and put it anywhere with any group of imams. It would look the same, all right? But what a critical eye is looking for is what is most essential in the time in which we live, and where is our message most needed to be applied, and what is the insight or what language should we be using to address these concerns? Not these general things, but specific matters. Nowhere on that discussion was the issue of the Palestinian people. And you all would know, not just because of what I have said, but from your own experiences in knowing Imam W. Muhammad's leadership, that this would be a matter of center attention for him in this moment. He would not be talking about it every now and then. Every time he spoke, he would be making a direct or indirect reference to it. More than any other consideration when it came to focusing where our attention should be as a community in supporting the dignity of human life on this earth, more than any other particular interest, Imam W. Muhammad, he identified the struggle of the Palestinian people. In every decade of his leadership, from the time he became leader, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all the way up until the conclusion of his life, he was still addressing the determination of the Palestinian people. So do you think that it wouldn't be in focus now, when the most egregious assault on their innocence is being witnessed? Now, shouldn't that be in the center of the minds of the leaders? And we have seen no consistent reference to it. In fact, well, I'm not going to, you know, I won't go further with that, other than just to say this, that just prior to what happened October 7th, a group of our leaders went to Israel. You would think that a group of our leaders, and I say that, I use the term our, because my heart wants to embrace them, just as the Imam's heart wanted to embrace them. They make it impossible. And that's what the Imam meant by I have reached the limit of my patience with you. You would think that a group of our leaders, before they went or accepted an invitation to Israel, that they would have looked carefully at what Imam Muhammad's position was, that they would have reviewed his visits to that area of the world and the reasons for those visits. And if they didn't know, then they would ask someone who did know or who was there. They didn't do any of that. And what we have now is a public display of the misrepresentation of our commitment to the determination of the Palestinian people. We have our leaders putting on the head covering of the Jews and praying at the Wailing Wall. That's what we have as an image. And it's not to disparage or in any way speak negatively of Jewish religious faith tradition. But what it is to say is that that visit in no way underscored or even referred to the just struggle of the Palestinian people. And there's no way that Imam W. Deen Mohammed would have accepted any invitation to Israel without a recognition of his commitment to that struggle. More than any other public representation of our community or misrepresentation of our community, that visit to Israel stands alone to display that this group that has had access to Imam Muhammad's teaching on critical matters refuses to embrace it. And at the same time, they use reference to him to justify them being in our focus. Now, what I'm about to say is going to be very controversial, but it's necessary. It's necessary to put on the record. If this group of leaders is so bent on not acknowledging a national status for our community, why does it tolerate that the Imam of Washington, D.C. refers to the masjid in Washington as the nation's mosque? When Muslim groups from outside of the United States look at us in the United States, their reference to us may not be historical. The way that they organize themselves influences the way that they see how we are organized. So if they are representing a body of Muslims in the country from where they are, they enjoy, or it is or we would assume that they enjoy the support of a national recognition. When they look at us, they're looking for the same thing. So they see a mosque called the nation's mosque. They immediately assume that this mosque is the headquarters of this group. And that person who is in charge of that mosque has been installed by the whole group. They're not thinking of it as a local congregation. They're thinking of it as the representation of a whole people. And the person who is acting in this regard, he knows that this is the way that it's being viewed, because I'm sure that they are speaking to him in those terms. They're not asking him about what his local interest is. They're asking him about the representation of his people, the people that he belongs to, and the leadership that he belongs to. So he has asserted the natural interest of the people to be represented as a group in their collective spirit and in their collective planning, while at the same time disassociating from the history where Imam W. Muhammad separated himself from their interests. Now, does this national body of leaders, you know, that have found it necessary to point my shortcomings or sins out, how they would know my sins, I don't know. But they seem to think they do. You know, they broadcast what they believe are my sins. I'm telling you. But have they used the same criteria in condemning me to assess this reality that I just described? Is the same criteria used? I have heard none of them say anything about the choice of the term nation's mosque to describe Masjid Muhammad in Washington, D.C. They have no commentary on it whatsoever. So, you know, for us to come to a reasonable conclusion about what's going on, all we have to do is look at the evidence. Look at it carefully and honestly. You know, I wouldn't have any issue at all if there was an open discussion and the leaders decided, okay, we're going to have a meeting, a national meeting, and we're going to have all of the leaders that were closely associated with Imam W. Muhammad on this stage. And we're going to have all the leaders who were representing another group who had relationship with us on this stage. And we're going to have Imam W. Muhammad's representative on the stage. Now that would be a true interaction with the people to witness it. And let us take on the critical questions. This particular matter. And let us hear from these persons that we all acknowledge. And the matter would be settled. Now, wouldn't that be an honest thing? That's internal. That's not for the public of America. That's an internal issue. So in that situation, if somebody from the audience said, well, I want to hear from Brother Abdulmalik on this particular issue, you can't say I can't speak to them. Even if they were to ask about the representation of my sins. Because then I would have the opportunity to respond. And I can show, not that I would, because I don't feel any obligation to confess anything to any population of people. Like none of us feel any obligation to confess anything to any population of people. We confess our sins to our Lord, and we ask for his forgiveness if we have shortcomings, and all of us have those shortcomings. And the things that they have amplified and magnified about me, most of it is not true. Like 99% of it isn't true. Not just like, you know, say most, like the majority, like 60%. No, 60%. It's like 99% of what they say about me is not true. But you haven't given, there hasn't been, you have put in the atmosphere so much poison that there's no situation for me to even address it. Unless an assembly like that is there, and then I can address it directly with you as a witness. And whatever argument you make, I can address you too. But how real is that as a possibility? It'll never happen. They'll never permit it. So, it is important because these persons continue to represent us for me to be critical of certain things. And there is a concern about being presented as having bitterness toward them. I don't have bitterness. I have love. And the same kind of love, the same quality of love that Imam W. Mohammed had for our people and for these leaders. But he also said this. In the last address that he gave for Savior's Day, not the last one, but the one before the last one, he was addressing the audience, and at a point, he was speaking to the leaders. And he said,
I can feel your jealousy and hate.
He's speaking to an individual, and he's speaking to a group. In everything that I do, in representation of what I know that would be authorized by him, I think about that. And so it's not manifesting me as bitterness. It's manifesting me as memory of what the late leader experienced, and a discipline in me to not be foolish, and to point out the areas where we have been hurt by this group, and to also state that I am aware of that strategy that they have, and I'm aware that they have also used that strategy to influence another generation of leaders. I see the reflection of it in them. In fact, in some cases, this next generation of leaders, they have a more pronounced even almost exaggerated loyalty to their teachers that are not Imam W. Mohammed. You know, you'll see them say things like, I was with Imam so-and-so for 30 years. Or one I saw, he said he was a student of Imam W. Mohammed and Imam Qasim Ahmed. What? Brother, what are you talking about? These are Qasim Ahmed's words. He was asked by Imam W. Mohammed, what were you doing before you came into the Nation of Islam? This is Qasim Ahmed reference. This is what he said. I'm telling you what he said. It's on tape. He said, I was a savage. That's how he described himself. And he said, I just came a little bit out of savagery when I joined the Nation of Islam. He said, I came all the way out of savagery when I followed your leadership. This is what he said to the Imam. So you telling me that Imam Qasim Ahmed is your teacher along with Imam W. Mohammed? Brother, what are you saying? Are you even aware of what you're saying? Another one said, I was with Imam so-and-so for 30 years. Those 30 years that you were with that Imam in that locale, Imam W. Mohammed was leader of the community. So I understand the loyalty to leadership. I understand the commitment to embrace persons that have been a factor for your development But if you're thoughtful as a leader and you want to help a congregation, or not just a local congregation, but larger than a local congregation, align themselves with something that's going to push them forward, you are going to first identify Muhammad the Prophet, and then you're going to identify how you came to appreciate Muhammad the Prophet's leadership and focus as it supports you in all areas of your application of Muslim life. Now, maybe I'm biased because my teacher was Imam W. Deen Mohammed exclusively, and I had interaction with a lot of these brothers that are imams, and I want to say I appreciate them and love them for all of the interactions that I had with them, and I also want to say that I learned from them in those interactions. But am I going to say that that person is my teacher to a public audience? No. If you were to ask Imam W. Muhammad who was his teacher, or how did he come to his mind that he had, and people have said to him, Dr. Jamil Diab, and he would say, go ask Dr. Jamil Diab, did he teach me? See what his answer would be. So I would say to these brothers, when you identify these people, go ask them. Now, the answer they might give is, yes, I taught him. I had them say that about me. I've had them say that they taught me to public audiences. I'm the one that introduced him to the Imam. One of them said it at a table, and the Imam said, what? What? The Imam had that look. He what? Oh, brother Imam, you know, he was with me before he was with you. Imam said, he was with me before he could say Dallas. Lord have mercy. So I know that's a long answer, not maybe an hour, but it's thorough. It's thorough. And if you review it, there's a lot in it to understand what has taken place. And I have, you know, I mentioned a few of them by name, maybe one or two by name. But let me put this on the record. It's important to put it on the record. I mentioned Imam Yusuf Salim in Washington, D.C., because more than any other Imam, he was with Imam W. Muhammad in critical moments. And he deserves to be considered for more than just a person to give a khutbah. He deserves to be considered and asked, what is his opinion of leadership presently? Not that I've had any conversation with him. I haven't. But because of his close proximity to the Imam in several different decades, as a leader in Washington, D.C., as a principal of the school in Chicago, he is a person that our community should have in its conscience to ask critical questions of. And one critical question is leadership. And he would be a person to ask, what is your opinion of what Imam W. Muhammad would say about leadership? Not your personal opinion about leadership, but what would the Imam say about it? And there are others. There are others. And I think the question has to be asked of them in a way that sensitizes them to say, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your seat at that table when you had a discussion with Imam Muhammad and these questions came up. What was his response? Because I wasn't at that table. You were. And so the companions of the Prophet, they were asked things and they gave the Prophet's position. And I've mentioned this one report where a person was asking a question about a matter. And they asked the person who was a companion of the Prophet and a learned person and who was respected for his learning. And the person gave them the answer. And then this person who asked the question, he said, well, Abu Bakr said, Omar said, such and such. And then this person started looking at the sky. And the person said, why are you looking at the sky? He said, I'm expecting the punishment. And so the person was confused. He said, you asked me what Prophet Muhammad said. I told you what Prophet Muhammad said. Now you're telling me what Abu Bakr and Omar said. Oh, well, you equating Imam W. Deen Mohammed with the messenger of God. Let me tell you something. Were it not for the womb of the Nation of Islam and the mind that was produced, purity and clarity of mind that was produced as teaching in Imam W. Deen Mohammed's ministry, you would not know Muhammad except for the way that the world presents him. You wouldn't know him. The references that he made to Prophet Muhammad's teaching, the hadiths that he has highlighted, all of those hadiths, there should be not literature produced by our community addressing some other matters. You want to address something critical, Imam so-and-so? Put together just Imam W. Deen Mohammed's commentary on the hadiths of Prophet Muhammad and see how beneficial that is to world populations of Muslims. Just take, you don't have to just take, he didn't refer to a whole lot of them. There might be a total of maybe 20 that he used continually over time, over the years of his leadership, over 33 years, maybe 20 to 25 hadiths that he emphasized. Find those 25 and put in there his commentary on what it means. For example, khairukum man yanfa an-nas, the best of you who is the one who gives the best service or who is of most benefit. Find his commentary just on that one hadith and see what changes are made in the Muslim world leadership. But you're too busy trying to impress people, trying to entertain them, trying to hold them as congregations. These are the efforts that have to be. It's not just a matter of transcribing Imam W. Deen Mohammed's speeches and putting them in books and then putting your labeling on it, talking about you edited it. So, you know, as a responsibility as leader, if I'm referring to myself in that way, it is my obligation to address these things in this way. We want to have on the record, public record, how to assess this. So, as I was saying about Imam Yusuf Salim, there are others that I believe, if asked specifically, a lot of these things would be clarified. You want to exclude me? Fine. Ask these persons. And like I said, put a stipulation on them. Don't tell me what you think. Tell me what he said. And here's another one who was right there at the table with you to verify. He said that. Now we have a real discussion. Well, I think so-and-so. No. Tell me what the Imam said. Brother so-and-so, is that what he said? Yes. Brother so-and-so, is that what he said? Yes. That's how we clear it up and straighten it out. Then we can say, based on what he said and your experience with him, would he have done this? Based on what you know he said and your own personal experience with him, would he have chosen this? Now, when you have that kind of disciplined discussion, you're talking about a mature people in leadership that are setting aside emotions in favor of certain and precise discipline. And then at the same time, it will strengthen them to disassociate themselves from weaknesses in their own spirit, because they will have other men and women supporting that effort in them. And then all the attention on somebody's shortcomings falls aside. It's not even important anymore, because the whole group has become strengthened by the process. Now, if there's some other leader advocating this, show them to me. You want to do a deep study of what I'm doing? That's why I'm insistent to put all of this on the record. Because it will not be said that this man was some kind of egomaniac. Now, I represent a tradition.
And I have to acknowledge the man that have done more than any other person to help me get the correct picture of Muslims and Imam W. Deen Mohammed to the public of America and the world. My son, stand up. Earl Abdulmalik Mohammed. Thank you. I thank God for him. He has done a wonderful job and is still doing it. He's on the job. In fact, from what he tells me, he's getting ready to put it out there in even bigger dimensions and bigger picture than he has done so far. He's getting ready to enlarge the picture. So if you don't like it, buddy, you better go home and grit your teeth and bite your fingernails, because you can't do anything about it in America, because we have American Christians knowing who we are and what we represent.
A tradition that God established and has evolved in a people to represent the human person in this moment. And I will not acquiesce that position. I will not turn aside from it.
Most leaders have to go. I used to wonder how come the leaders go. If I stay around here, there are going to be at least 10 hypocrites that's going to come to smile in my face and act like they want to talk to me.
Yeah.
Now, if I really felt there wasn't going to be any hypocrite close to me, I would stay with you. Thank you very much. See you next time.